The narrative of Steve Perry is often reduced to the mechanics of a rock star walking away from the spotlight, yet this surface-level analysis fails to account for the profound psychological architecture of his life. To understand why the voice of Journey chose silence over superstardom, one must look past the headlines and examine the intersection of early childhood instability and the crushing weight of fame. Perry's life was never a linear trajectory toward success. It was a complex attempt to reconcile a desperate need for belonging with the exhausting demands of the music industry. His story acts as a mirror, reflecting the heavy toll that the American dream can exact on an artist whose identity is inextricably linked to his creative output. When we analyze his departures, we aren't just looking at a musician quitting a band. We are witnessing an individual fighting to preserve his own humanity against a system designed to consume it. This is not merely a tale of rock and roll excess, but a deeper, more human inquiry into what remains when the applause finally fades and the stage lights are turned off. Born in the quiet landscape of Hanford, California, Steve Perry's early years were characterized by a lack of traditional domestic stability. His father, a figure who occupied the worlds of both radio and music, instilled in the young Perry an understanding that sound was not just a medium but a vessel for identity. However, when his parents' marriage dissolved, the resulting move to a dairy farm in Lemoore shifted the emotional landscape of his youth. This period of isolation became the crucible in which his artistic sensibility was forged. It was here, in the quiet spaces between chores, that he discovered the soul-stirring resonance of Sam Cooke. This wasn't merely a musical discovery, it was an emotional awakening. For a child grappling with the confusion of a broken home, music became the only reliable language for expression. This early association between sound and emotional survival would later become the defining factor in his career, serving as both his greatest asset on the microphone and the primary source of his eventual, inevitable internal collapse. The pursuit of music in early adulthood was not a glamorous ascent, but a grueling series of lessons in rejection and persistence. Moving to Sacramento, Perry found himself adrift in a sea of failed projects and missed opportunities. He saw legends like Stevie Wonder at work, yet his own path remained frustratingly blocked by poor management and the harsh realities of a cutthroat industry. Each failed band was not just a professional setback, it was a personal blow that tested his resolve. The most harrowing of these experiences occurred with the band Alien Project. The sudden, tragic death of their bassist in a car accident did more than dissolve the group, it shattered Perry's belief in the viability of his own dreams. He nearly walked away for good, marking the first time he realized that the emotional cost of pursuing music might outweigh the potential rewards. This context is essential for any analysis of his later life. He entered the behemoth that was Journey not as a naive star, but as someone already intimately acquainted with the fragility of existence. When Steve Perry finally joined Journey, he didn't just join a rock band. He injected a specific melancholic and deeply melodic sensibility into a group searching for its soul. The band was at a precarious crossroads, struggling to define its place in an evolving musical landscape. Perry's vocal influence and his insistence on emotion over mere technical proficiency acted as a catalyst for their global success. Yet this success brought with it a paradox. As Journey scaled the heights of popularity, the pressure on Perry to remain the consistent, high-performance voice grew exponentially. This was the moment where the public's perception began to diverge from the reality. To the audience, he was the triumphant frontman of a legendary act. To himself, he was an individual struggling to maintain the emotional authenticity that had made him sing in the first place. The tension between the band's commercial requirements and his own need for artistic and personal truth was the silent friction that would eventually lead to his first departure from the limelight. While the story of the band often centers on the tensions surrounding the recording of Raised on Radio, it is impossible to overlook the genuine human tragedy occurring in Perry's private life. He was caught in a grueling cycle of travel, attempting to bridge the impossible distance between the sterile, demanding environment of the recording studio and the overwhelming reality of his mother's failing health. These were not mere logistical inconveniences, they were existential fractures. The studio demanded a performance, but his heart was situated in the San Joaquin Valley, mourning the inevitable decline of the person who had served as his primary anchor. When his mother eventually passed away, it was not merely a loss. It was a total collapse of the support system that had allowed him to function within the high-pressure ecosystem of the band. The grief was so profound that it rendered the trivialities of album production and promotional touring entirely meaningless. For the first time, he realized that he could no longer perform at the level expected of him. Burnout is often used as a catch-all term for leaving a job, but in Perry's case, it was a fundamental disconnection from his own essence. After years of relentless touring, repeating the same anthems and projecting a version of himself that was expected by millions, he reached a state where the music no longer resonated with his spirit. For an artist like Perry, the voice is not a tool. it is a direct extension of the self. To lose interest in the music was to lose a sense of who he was. His first departure, which looks so sudden to the outside observer, was actually the final act of a long internal withdrawal. He did not leave out of vanity or a demand for more money. He left because continuing would have required a level of dishonesty that he found morally untenable. He chose to step into an uncertain, quiet future rather than continue a public life that had become a hollow echo of his former self. During the years of his silence, Steve Perry did not just take a vacation. He entered a period of deep, necessary disconnection from the industry that had defined his identity. This was not a calculated hiatus to build demand. It was a defensive maneuver to protect his mental health. He described this time as being plagued by a form of lingering trauma. Even the proximity to music became difficult, as it triggered memories and emotional pressures that he wasn't yet equipped to process. By removing himself completely from the public sphere, he was attempting to heal the parts of his soul that had been sacrificed on the altar of commercial success. This phase of his life is perhaps the most misunderstood. While fans speculated about reunions and drama, Perry was engaged in the quiet, agonizing work of finding out who he was outside of a microphone. It was a period of forced anonymity that served as a necessary purification of his artistic spirit. The return to the public consciousness came not from a desire for fame, but through the transformative power of love and personal tragedy. His relationship with Kelly Nash, a fellow survivor who understood the weight of life and death, acted as a mirror for his own vulnerabilities. Unlike his previous life defined by thousands of anonymous faces in a stadium, this connection was built on raw, unfiltered honesty. It was through her that he learned to look at time differently. When she encouraged him to stop hiding and to re-engage with the world, it wasn't a push for career advancement. It was a plea for him to embrace his own existence. Her influence reshaped his worldview, turning his previous isolation into a realization that he had more to give. It was this shift in perspective that allowed him to view his past not as a burden, but as a collection of traces that could be turned into art. The completion of the album Traces serves as the final definitive answer to why Perry walked away. It is an exploration of loss, the passage of time, and the act of rediscovering oneself. The music on this record is not an attempt to recreate the stadium rock of the 80s, but a reflection of a man who has lived through the fire and emerged on the other side. By analyzing this work, one can see that his departure was never about the band. It was about the necessity of preservation. If he had stayed, he likely would have lost the very voice that made him special. By leaving, he saved his ability to create music on his own terms. Traces is a testament to the idea that true success is not measured in record sales or sold-out tour, but in the ability to reach a point of personal peace. It proves that his initial choice to walk away was, in hindsight, the most authentic decision of his life. The story of Mitzi Gaynor during the production of South Pacific provides a fascinating, parallel analysis of the burdens of stardom and the necessity of personal commitment. While Perry was struggling with the emotional weight of his fame, Gaynor was fighting the structural biases of a Hollywood system that doubted her capabilities. The casting process for the role of Nellie Forbush was not just a search for an actress, it was an audition for an icon. The rejection of major stars like Elizabeth Taylor and Doris Day underscores how difficult the role was. It required a rare blend of acting, dancing, and vocal prowess that few possessed. When Gaynor stepped into the role, she didn't just inherit a character. She committed to a standard of excellence that demanded she do her own singing and dancing. This dedication stands in stark contrast to the common practices of the era, where dubbing was the norm. It highlights a commonality between her and Perry. Both were artists who demanded truth from themselves, even when the environment around them encouraged compromise. The filming of South Pacific in Hawaii was sold to the public as a paradise, but in reality, it was a grueling test of patience and endurance for the cast and crew. The beautiful tropical setting masked the logistical nightmares of a production that felt increasingly disconnected from its own creative goal. For Mitzi Gaynor, the experience was a crucible. She was stepping into shoes made famous by Mary Martin, knowing full well that comparisons were inevitable. Her strategy was not to mimic the past but to inject a new sense of life and vitality into the character. This required a relentless work ethic that went well beyond the script. While others on set struggled with the heat and the demands of the studio, Gaynor was constantly refining her performance. It was a demonstration of professional integrity that mirrored the way Perry approached his own work before his eventual departure. Both artists found themselves in environments where the professional demand for perfection required an almost inhuman sacrifice of their personal comfort. When South Pacific finally premiered in 1958, it was a commercial juggernaut, earning millions and cementing Gaynor's status as a formidable talent. However, the success did not lead to a continued string of big-budget musicals. Hollywood's tastes were changing, and the golden age of the movie musical was fading. Rather than clinging to an industry that was moving on, Gaynor made a move that was as strategic as it was intuitive. She pivoted toward television. This era of her career, much like Perry's eventual return to music, highlights the adaptability of a true artist. She recognized that her strength, the ability to connect with a live audience through performance, was better suited for the intimate, expansive medium of television variety shows. This was a second act that proved she was not merely a product of the studio system, but an independent force who could navigate the changing winds of popular entertainment with grace and foresight. The 1960s were a period of massive cultural upheaval, yet Mitzi Gaynor's television career flourished as she embraced the medium as a new stage for her talents. Her performance on The Ed Sullivan Show during the height of Beatlemania is a historic touchstone. To hold the attention of 70 million viewers during a time when the world was obsessed with the Beatles is a testament to her unique, electrifying stage presence. She did not try to compete with the changing musical trends. She provided a sophisticated, high-energy alternative. This is a critical lesson for any performer. The ability to maintain one's identity while adapting to new platforms is the key to longevity. Gaynor's work in these years was not just variety television, it was a masterful display of the American entertainer's versatility. By blending comedy, dance, and music, she transcended the boundaries of the traditional movie star and became a television institution in her own right. The partnership between Mitzi Gaynor and costume designer Bob Mackie is perhaps one of the most iconic collaborations in the history of television entertainment. Mackie, known as the Sultan of Sequins, created a visual language that perfectly complemented Gaynor's dynamic performances. These were not just clothes, they were instruments of movement and light. The intricate detail of the designs served to amplify every gesture, turning her specials into visual spectacles that held the audience's attention from start to finish. This relationship emphasizes that success in the public eye is rarely a solitary endeavor, it is built on the synergy of creative minds working toward a common vision. For Gaynor, these collaborations were essential in ensuring that her brand of entertainment remained relevant, stylish, and unmistakably her own, even as fashions and cultural tastes evolved throughout the decades. While Hollywood may have sidelined the musical genre, Las Vegas became a sanctuary for entertainers of Gaynor's caliber. In the late 1960s and 70s, she commanded the stage at legendary venues like the Flamingo and the Riviera. These were not just performances, they were residencies that demanded the highest level of stamina and engagement. Earning an unprecedented $45,000 a week, she became a pillar of the Las Vegas entertainment scene. This transition shows a deep-seated commitment to the craft of live performance, a trait she shared with Steve Perry. For both, the stage was where they felt most alive, and where their connection to the audience was direct and unmediated. Even at the height of her success in Vegas, Gaynor never lost the spark that had made her a standout in her early screen tests, proving that her star power was not a manufactured studio asset, but a genuine internal quality. The fact that Gaynor was the first woman to win the Las Vegas Governor's Trophy for Star Entertainer of the Year in 1970 is more than a footnote. It is an acknowledgement of her persistence and excellence. In a landscape that was often dominated by male voices or traditional bands, she carved out a unique space for herself as a solo performer of immense power. This award was a validation of her second act, demonstrating that one's career does not have to end when the film industry changes its focus. By analyzing her career alongside Perry's, we see two different approaches to the same problem: how to navigate fame, how to manage the expectations of an audience, and how to define success on one's own terms. Both individuals prioritized their autonomy, refusing to allow their narratives to be dictated by the commercial pressures of the industries they inhabited. Returning to the theme of Steve Perry's departure, we can draw a direct comparison to the fragility that all stars experience. Perry's hiking injury and the subsequent discovery of his health conditions served as a physical manifestation of his internal exhaustion. The band's ultimatum to undergo surgery and return to the road or be replaced was a critical juncture that forced a final, irrevocable decision. In many ways, this was the moment where the industry's needs directly clashed with the individual's humanity. By walking away, Perry was effectively choosing his physical and mental health over the continuation of a status quo that he no longer believed in. It is a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing the show over the person, and one that continues to resonate with anyone who has felt the pressures of a demanding professional life. Ultimately, Perry's decision to leave for the second time was not a sign of defeat, but a declaration of independence. He understood that to return to the band under those conditions would have been to live a lie. He chose the vulnerability of an uncertain, private life over the artificial stability of a touring band. This choice is rarely seen in the world of high-level entertainment, where the momentum of success is usually treated as a sacred force. By rejecting that momentum, Perry preserved the integrity of his voice and his legacy. He transformed his departure into an act of self-preservation, which, in the long run, is far more significant than any album or tour. His story forces us to reconsider our own relationship with ambition and the costs we are willing to pay for our personal goals. Analyzing the life and career of someone like Steve Perry or Mitzi Gaynor is not just about recounting dates and record sales. It is about understanding the human condition in the face of immense public pressure. Both figures, in their own unique ways, reached a point where the traditional definition of success no longer aligned with their personal truth. Their stories remind us that we are not defined solely by our professional output, but by our ability to make choices that preserve our sense of self. Whether through a tactical retreat like Perry or a strategic reinvention like Gaynor, both showed that the true mark of an artist is the courage to define their own path, even when it means leaving the world of expectation behind. As we look back on these journeys, we are left with a clearer understanding of what it means to lead a meaningful life. The path to fulfillment is rarely straightforward, and it often requires the strength to walk away from everything we have worked for in order to find what truly matters. Steve Perry's voice may have been the one the world wanted, but it was his courage to silence that voice when it no longer spoke for his soul that truly defines him. This documentary-style analysis reveals that beneath the glitz of fame, the core of the human experience remains the same: a search for peace, a search for authenticity, and the strength to protect both at all costs. This is the real, untold journey that lies beneath the music, the lights, and the enduring legacy of an icon.